Alright everybody, this is your video to show you how to set up the Sony ZV-1 Mark II with those settings that I use to get some of those really nice, superb, and cinematic shots. Straight out of the box, it's a great camera, but if you want to be able to use all of the functionality that it offers, then I highly suggest that you customize your camera. For those of you who have a keen eye, you'll see that this is the ZV-1, but thankfully for you and for me, I was able to screen record the display of the ZV-1 Mark II that Sony sent to me before I sent it back. So now I can make this video. Also, when you're out in the field and you're shooting with your new camera, you don't want to be fumbling around with the menu system to try to find something that you need. I know it's a little bit annoying to set up your camera, but if you just take the time to do it, it's really going to help with your efficiency and your workflow while you're out in the field. So without further ado, let's jump right into the camera so I can show you how I set it up. There are 4 places where we're going to customize the camera. The first one is inside the menu system, my menu system. The second one is the actual touchscreen. Then we have the function menu and then also the custom buttons on the outside. So I'm gonna start on the inside of the menu system and then I'm gonna work my way out. Also, Sony set up a very convenient number system inside the menu system, so it's easy for me to reference you to certain spots. Before it was by tabs, and now we actually have 1 out of 51. So if I say go to 22 of 51, that would be color tone within the exposure color. Over the years, I found that I used a lot of settings in the camera, but not enough to put them in the function menu or as a custom button on the outside of the camera. So that's where I put them, into my menu settings. So if we go to the star on the top, you can see my menu setting. And if you click on it, it'll take you to add item, sort item, delete item, etc. I click add item and you can go through the entire menu system and pick whatever you think is going to be best for you. Now this is how I set up my menu system. I have 2 custom menus set up. One is for video, one is for photography. If we go from top to bottom, the first option I put in there is format. This will format your SD card if you're out shooting a lot. This is definitely something that's important to put right here at the top because it stinks when you get out into the field and you start to shoot and you realize that your SD card is full and you want to clear it and then you can't figure out where it is in the menu system. Next, I put file format to give me the option between shooting in HD, 1080, HD, or I can turn it to go to 4K. That way, if I want to shoot in 4K 24 for a couple of shots, and then I want to switch it over to say slow motion and shoot in 1080, 120, then I can easily swap and toggle between the two. Right underneath is movie settings, which will give you your frame rate options depending on which file format you're in. And if I'm shooting in 4K, then I can shoot up to 30 frames per second. If you are in a different part of the world, you can change these settings from NTSC to PAL. I'll leave how to do that in the settings. Next down, I have camera set memory, which gives you 3 different options of how you can set up your camera if you're in a run and gun situation. I'll get to more of that later in the video. Then I have microphone directivity, which is set up right now as all directions, meaning it'll pick up audio in the front and the back of the camera. But if I'm filming something in the front and I don't want it to pick up anything behind the camera, that I can just come here and set it to front only, or I can set it to auto to pick up between both the front and the back. Then we have our grid line display for when I'm shooting video. This is very helpful, so I can get those lower third grids and I know that I'm framing my shot properly. And then also focus area. Right now my focus area is set to zone. We'll come back to this later. So that's how I set up my menu for a video, and you can set it up like that, or you can set it up however you want. The next slot down is my menu 2, which is for photography, and this is how I set it up. File format, so I can choose between JPEG and RAW, but you do have to be shooting in photo mode in order for that to not be grayed out. Then I have time lapse, which is also known as interval shooting function. This is hugely helpful because there's been a lot of times where I wanted to take quick time lapse of something and then I had to go find it at the menu systems and I couldn't find it, and so then I just didn't get my time lapse. So I like to put it right here in the front. Bracket settings are pretty neat because it takes 3 to 5 to 7 photos at different exposures, and then in post-production you can mix all of those photos together to give yourself an HDR photo, which makes it look like you have a very high dynamic range camera. I also have the grid line display set up and the recognition target, which is I can switch between humans and animals. If you're into shooting your adorable cat, then you might want to have this on the front end so you can switch it over really quick and then it will autofocus on the cat's eye rather than just a human eye. Next, we're going to jump onto the touchscreen and I'm going to go over what each selection is. Now, I try to advise on not touching the screen too much because in a low light environment like we are right now, it's perfectly fine. But once you take the camera outside and you're in the blazing sun, the grease from your fingers will be on the screen. It'll be very difficult to see what's on the screen. So if we can just try to avoid touching the screen at all costs and move all of the functionality that's within the touchscreen onto our custom buttons or in the function menu, then we're all set to go. So that's what we're gonna do. Now you can't really customize this touchscreen too much, but you can customize where the things are on the screen itself. So if we go to 4351, which is touch operation, and then we go to shooting screen, I set this up so that when you swipe right, the icon display goes left, and when you swipe left, the icon display goes right. Straight out of the box, both icon displays will stay on both sides of the display, which might inhibit your ability to see what's on the frame or what's inside of the screen. And I want to be able to swipe one of them to the right or to the left, depending on what I'm using. I set this up so I can just get rid of them if I don't need them, but not at the same time. If I still need the right side, I can swipe the left one to the left and then it will disappear. But so you know what's on either side of the icon display, so you know whether or not you need it or not, I'll run through it. We have the record button, which we also have on the top of the camera, so we don't really need to touch that. If you have a camera pointed towards you and you feel like you won't be able to hit the small record button, you can always turn record with shutter on 4251. That'll enable this top button, the shutter button, which is also your photography shutter button, to enable recording. That way it's a little bit easier to feel on the top of the camera if it's kind of pointed away from you. A lot of times I'll try to press the record button and I'll hit the mode button or the background defocus button by accident, but this button is a little bit more pronounced. Next, we have the product showcase mode, where with one touch you can enable the camera to lock onto whatever is in front of the camera rather than your face. This is a useful tool, and I'll put it into the function menu so I don't need it in the icon display. Then we have zoom, which you don't need because we have a zoom rocker on the top of the camera. We have playback, which we don't need because we already have a playback button on the outside of the camera. On the top, we have shoot mode, where you can switch between different shooting modes. Intelligent auto, where the camera shoots with automatic scene recognition. Program auto, or auto exposure, which only exposes for the light and keeps your camera exposed to whatever you have the exposure compensation set to while you're shooting in auto. We have shutter priority, aperture priority, and manual. I actually put shooting mode inside of the function menu, so we don't need that one. Then the next one down, we have the self timer, which I put into the function menu, so I don't need that one. Microphone directivity, we already set that in my menu 1, so we don't need that one. And Cine Vlog, which I put into the function menu as well, so we can just swipe the icon display out of the way. Now we have a clear display and we don't need to touch our screen. Now, if you're not a fan of that little box that you're getting in the camera, that's zone focus. So we need to change our focus to something else. I like to put mine to wide focus. So here's a pop quiz. Where can you find your focus area? The answer is in the My Menu settings, number 1. If you got that right, you're a good student. So we're gonna go back to that star. We're gonna go to My Menu. We'll go down to the focus area, and we're gonna turn that zone to wide, and that will get it to disappear, and you can change it to whatever focus area you have in mind for whatever you're shooting. We talked a lot about the function menu, so this would be a good time to jump into the function menu, and I can show you how I set mine up and how you can set yours up, and you can match yours to mine if you want, or you can customize it however you want. Before we do that, let's go over to 4251, where we're gonna go down to Operation Customize, and then we go to function menu settings. Now there's two different options here. There's the top function menu, which is for photography, and the bottom function menu, which is for video. This is how I set up my video function menu. I haven't really touched my photography function menu because I don't plan on using this camera for photography, but you can use the same method that I'll teach you on the video side for photography if you want to take some photos. This is how you set up your function menu. You just click on whatever box that you want, and then you can go through the entire menu system and pick whatever it is that you feel as though you'll need. Now I lost picture profile. See how important it is to set this stuff up in function menu so you're not out there digging around trying to figure out where picture profiles are. So picture profile is in 14 out of 23. It goes from 51 down to 23 because you don't have all of the options from the main menu system to go into your function menu system, so just remember that. But I set up picture profile as the top box. Then we have product showcase mode, which we talked about, and I think it's fine just to leave it in your function menu. That way you don't have to touch your screen. I have Cine Vlog set here. I haven't really played around with this much, but looks pretty fun, and I think I could be pretty creative with it. So maybe in the future, I'll try to make some videos with that. Then we have our exposure compensation. Exposure compensation is great when you're shooting aperture priority, shutter priority, or program auto, or auto intelligent mode. This will ensure that the camera never exposes over 0.0 if that's what you have it set to. I like to set mine to negative 0.3 because you never know what kind of lighting condition you're in. You can always bring up your highlights in post, but you can't bring them down. Then I have the self timer set up. Maybe if I want to set up the camera and then walk around and go in front of the tripod, then that would be my way to do that. We have zebra levels. This is good for when you're in high key environments or even in a low key environment. You're just making sure that the skin tones are set and that you don't have zebras blasting your subject's skin colors. Now going from left to right, at the bottom I have active stabilization, where I can toggle between active stabilization and no stabilization at all. I have white balance. You'd be very surprised to know how much your image will change if you custom white balance your shot, because every lighting condition is different. I think white balance is one of the biggest ways to improve your image quality, as long as you're not in a run and gun situation and you're going from room to room and then outside and inside. If you're kind of setting in a studio setting, then go ahead and do a custom white balance. That way your image looks as best as possible. We have peaking display. This will give you little outlines on the outside of a subject when you're in manual focus to make sure that the subject is actually 100% in focus. That way your image isn't soft at all. Then we have peak level. I set this to mid. That way it's not too crazy and I can still concentrate on the frame. Then we have zebra display. This is how I can turn it on and off. Sometimes I don't need zebras. I can just perfectly see in my display. It looks great and I can turn them off because sometimes they're distracting. And then we have shoot mode. That's where you can go through program auto intelligent mode, shutter priority, aperture priority, and manual exposure. Once your function menu is set up, now we're going to jump to the outside of the camera and I'm going to show you how I set up the custom buttons, mainly on the back, but there's a pretty important one on the top, so make sure you stay to the end. If you stay on that menu page 4251 and you go on up to custom key setting with the little video icon, you click on it, you see you have 4 different options for the buttons that are on the back of the camera. This is one of the most important things when I was out shooting with the Sony ZV-1 Mark II. It was like I was playing an instrument because I knew where all of these things were. I had set up the ZV-1 with these exact buttons, so it made it very nice for me to be able to go out and not have to break up my creative flow and just move with it. So I know it'll benefit you as well. The first thing that I did was I turned that little trash can icon on the bottom right to autofocus manual focus toggle. This is important because sometimes you're autofocused on something and maybe somebody keeps walking in front of the camera or you have trees moving past the camera and you want to stay focused on the thing that's downrange. Well, you let your autofocus focus on whatever it is that you want, and then you push that little trash can button, it toggles it over to manual focus, and then you won't have any focus breathing and you'll stay locked on your subject. I think on my ZV-1, the paint is removed from the trash can button because I use that so much. The next one is this middle button right here. It's touch operation select. This will just enable or disable the touch operation on the screen. Sometimes I don't want to touch track anything, or maybe touch tracking is on and I want to disable it. I just press that middle button and it takes care of it. Number 3 is our ND filter. It's that left side of the scroll wheel. It's a little button you push in, and then I can quickly and easily get to the ND filter without having to dive into the menu system. The ND filter is one of the biggest benefits to this camera, mainly because when you're out and you're in a weird lighting situation and you don't want to compromise your exposure settings, you can turn on your ND filter. That way you don't have to crank the shutter speed way up and then you won't have a jittery look. Then my number 4 is my ISO. It's a quick little easy touch on the right side, and then I can crank my ISO up or down. Now, I would not advise going above 800. Maybe you could crank it to 1600 in certain situations, but for the most part, try not to take it above 800. Then of course, the bottom button will toggle between your shutter speed and your aperture. So I just leave it there just the way it was inside of the box. Now let's move to the top of the camera. Now on the top, I changed the background defocus button to my audio record levels. This is huge when you're in an environment that's really noisy, or maybe not noisy at all, maybe really quiet, and you want to just change it so you're not peaking. This does not have a headphone jack, so you can't monitor your audio. So you want to be able to have quick access to the audio record level to turn it up or down, and then just look at the level and make sure it's not peaking. I try to keep it between -12 and -6. If that's where I'm sitting around, then my audio is generally pretty good. And then finally, the number 2, which is the movie recording button, I just left it there, but you can change this if you want, because don't forget, we changed the shutter button on the top to record, so that means we have a free button. I'll leave this open in case maybe in a couple months or something I'm using a setting that I didn't know I was going to use a lot, and I'm like, man, I need to get to that fast. Well, now I have an extra button and I don't have to use one of these other ones that I find so useful. Last but not least is camera memory recall. This is a great quick function to switch between camera presets. First, set your camera in whatever configuration you want. I like to base out the camera, so 24 frames per second in 4K with a shutter speed of 1/50, my aperture at f1.8, and I set ISO to 100. Then you go to My Menu 1, and then the fourth one down, which is Camera Set Memory, and set it. You can do this with a total of 3 presets depending on what you're shooting. I say go with 24 frames per second in 4K for talking head, 60 at 1080 for B-roll, and 120 at 1080 for slow motion. Then you can get to these memories through the shoot mode button inside the function menu. I hope this video helps you set up your ZV-1 Mark II so you can get out into the field quickly and be very proficient with your instrument, because at the end of the day, it is an instrument and you have to learn how to play it, rather than just going out into the field and trying to figure it out and wrestle with the settings. Please let me know if you have any questions about the ZV-1 Mark II, and hopefully I can answer it, or someone else who is in the Film Alliance community will be able to help you out. I'm Joe with the Film Alliance. Thanks for watching this video, and until the next one, have a nice week.